Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Bluestein Family Foundation, Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Malkin Fund, the Center for Educational Outreach and Innovation at Teachers College, Columbia University, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America, and Rudder Finn. I'm Richard Heffner, your host on The Open Mind, and while this week's program, and next week's too, may seem to take us somewhat off our series' beaten path, in fact, both stem from a rather familiar pilgrimage to the past that my wife and I make most years, to Franklin Delano Roosevelt's historic Hudson Valley birthplace in Hyde Park, New York, the gracious home where a devoted Franklin grew and matured and to which he returned whenever possible, where he and Eleanor Roosevelt lived, where both the President and the First Lady are buried, and where thousands upon thousands of people from every part of the United States, indeed from all over the world, have continued to come for nearly 60 years now, paying their respects at the home, at the gravesite, at the magnificent new visitor center, and of course at FDR's incomparable Presidential Library and Museum, the first of its kind, so hospitable and helpful to visitors and to scholars who continue to research every aspect of Roosevelt's years in office as two-term governor of New York and 4 times elected President of the United States. Surely at Hyde Park, all who visit find that they share there, in the words of a wonderfully evocative memorial film, a rendezvous with history.
Here are 4 generations of the Roosevelt family. Sitting down here next to me is Mrs. Roosevelt, my wife, and my granddaughter, Anna Roosevelt Dow, on her lap, and then my daughter, Anna Dow, and Buzzy on her lap, and then my mother. What's our campaign slogan, Sissy?
Happy days are here again.
Good, that's right.
The President of the United States.
That's him, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
They called him FDR.
FDR.
What a dresser with the cigarette holder and the hats. He was quite a guy. I loved him. I was crazy about him.
The man is alive. He's vibrant. He loves what he does. He radiates joy. I mean, his eyes just twinkled. And FDR could charm the socks off of you, but the thing was, he liked you.
The greatest president since Washington and Lincoln.
People elected him 4 times.
4 times. He was a radical and a double-crosser.
How do you know?
My father told me. Roosevelt tried to ruin the country.
Know something? He saved our farm. He gave us hope.
This is preeminently the time to speak the truth, the whole truth, frankly and boldly. Nor need we shrink from honestly facing conditions in our country today. This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper.
In 100 days, Franklin Roosevelt transformed the American government, made it huge beyond belief, made it part of everyone's life. He was the ultimate politician, a man who got things done. He hated corporate greed and rescued capitalism from its own excess. An aristocrat who reignited the idea of a government for and by the people. made the people his partners in his passion for a better democracy. Franklin D. Roosevelt loved being president.
We were not supposed to wave, ordered my mother. The cheering was for my grandfather. I'm the little boy, and it's my older sister. Sis and I lived here as children. This was home to me, as well as to my grandfather. What a place to play. Hiding behind trees for tag and hide and seek, and it was a wonderful place to grow up. My grandfather was a marvelous grandfather, as well as being President of the United States. He would read the funnies to us, and he was terrific.
That's his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt.
Eleanor Roosevelt went everywhere.
Eleanor Roosevelt broke the mold as a first lady.
She went into the heart of the country and learned what was really going on.
To give of her personal presence to people, to occasions, to causes.
No other First Lady was like Eleanor Roosevelt, before or since.
I'm very glad to be back, and we've had a particularly delightful trip and enjoyed every minute of it.
So many times people say I look so much like my grandmother, and they say, you know, what is it? And I think that, I hope anyway, it's her smile that I've inherited. I'm so proud of my grandmother. She wanted to be helpful. There was nothing complicated about this. There was nothing ambitious about this. She simply looked at who she was and where she was and tried to figure out how to be helpful.
She was First Lady for 13 years, but she had a political career for 17 years after FDR's life. She wrote 17 books, 556 articles, 8,000 columns. She was a member of the first American delegation to the United Nations. She was courageous, she was intense, she was sweet, and she always put you at ease and gave you courage.
My dear Mrs. Roosevelt, I have worried myself almost ill trying to think of some way to get some clothing, and after a while decided to write to you. I know you must have so many discarded clothes because you always look so lovely in your pictures, and I know you are kind because you have such a sweet face. I have a little boy 9 years old and work as a maid in a family of 5.
They're only gray for a day,
and I can't possibly clothe my child and myself.
So wrap your troubles in dreams and dream your troubles away until that
1932. We called it the Great Depression.
So many people out of work.
Everything gone. Jobs, savings, food.
You had nothing, you got nothing. Absolutely no money. Everybody had to hustle and struggle.
On the day Roosevelt was inaugurated, banks were closed in 32 states. Couldn't pay their customers. In Pittsburgh and Detroit, half the people were out of work. Illinois closed 1,000 schools. Couldn't pay the teachers. In West Virginia, 90% of the children suffered from malnutrition. In a single day in Mississippi, half the state's farms were put up for auction.
First of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed effort.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. This is the original manuscript of the inaugural address as written at Hyde Park on Monday, February 27, 1933. Here it is in his handwriting. FDR was himself, as far as I recollect, fearless. What he radiated was his own sense of confidence and his confidence in Americans. The American people related to him, and he related to them, and that was his bond.
I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people.
He called it the New Deal. A new deal for the forgotten man.
And he said, nobody's going to starve in this country, Everybody's going to have a little food. Every person who is an American citizen has a right to enjoy the fruits of liberty. And that was the New Deal. Social Security, welfare, unemployment. I mean, all of these things were ways of saying, we're going to treat you properly because you're American.
10 million jobs, banking reform, stock market reform, programs for farmers.
If the average citizen is guaranteed equal opportunity in the polling place, he must have equal opportunity in the marketplace.
This driveway had a very particular memory for my grandfather. You know he had polio. You know he was crippled. Part of his therapy that he invented for himself was to drag himself on his crutches with no support from his legs whatsoever, just his arms and shoulders moving those crutches forward and the legs coming up, all the way up to the end of that driveway. At a young age, I just was unconscious of his being crippled. When we went swimming later, then I could see just how powerfully built he was. Arms, shoulders, chest. And then it came down to nothing, shriveled hips and legs.
He has one priceless attribute, a knack of locking up his and the world's worries in some secret mental compartment, and then enjoying himself to the top of his bent. The quality of survival, of physical toughness, of champagne ebullience is one key to the big man. Another key is this: no one has ever heard him admit that he cannot walk. Time magazine, June 1940.
Remember the Dust Bowl? The people and the land nearly died. The whole middle of the country saw its precious soil picked up and blown away. Doesn't happen anymore because Franklin Roosevelt knew what to do and he did it. Franklin Roosevelt changed the face of America.
200 million acres of trees from the Dakotas to the Texas Panhandle to stop the dust storms.
39,000 new schools, 65,000 playgrounds, 1 million miles of highway.
A U.S. Mint for San Francisco, a city hall for Kansas City, an auditorium for Topeka.
Airports for Washington, for Philadelphia, for Cleveland, New York, Chicago.
A new post office for Concord, for Crawfordsville, Coronado, Carlisle, and Camden. Billings and Baton Rouge.
Grand Coulee Dam, the Bonneville Dam.
The Tennessee Valley Authority. Electric power for farms and towns and
The
factories.
Natchez Trace, Pennsylvania Turnpike, Overseas Highway to Key West.
Lakeshore Drive, East River Drive, Skyline Drive.
A medical center for Jersey City, a subway system for Chicago, a great mall for Washington.
3 billion trees for forests and parklands.
The first presidential library, his idea, his gift to the American people.
I'm glad that you have come today because, as I suggested at lunch to some of the trustees, this is the last chance you've got to see this library free of charge.
Nothing like a library, though, you know? There are so many great stories. I love this picture of my grandmother with Marian Anderson. I love how happy she looks. How happy they both look to be in each other's company.
$75,000 massed before Lincoln Memorial to hear Marian Anderson, colored contralto, make her capital debut at the Great Emancipator Shrine. Refusal of the DAR to let her use their hall spanned a countrywide controversy, with this great gathering as the climax.
Grandmère resigned from the Daughters of the American Revolution, who owned the hall and who had prevented Marian Anderson from giving this concert. But instead of just protesting, She arranged for Miss Anderson to sing at the Lincoln Memorial for thousands.
Eleanor Roosevelt was the first lady of civil rights.
A white woman who had no prejudice and no fear. And that's what gave her power.
When she was in her 70s, she traveled alone to Tennessee to support the civil rights workers, where she knew the Ku Klux Klan was waiting for her. The Klan put a bounty on her head, $25,000. They found dynamite packed around the wheels of her car.
And she persisted, even knowing that there were attempts on her own life. As she said, courage can be exhilarating.
Roosevelt saw the war coming before anybody else.
He knew all along what Hitler was up to. Saw the menace. Kept trying to tell us.
Frankly and definitely, there is danger ahead. Danger against which we must prepare. The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis. There can be no appeasement with ruthlessness. There can be no reasoning with an incendiary bomb.
He risked his political career getting ready for the war when no one would listen.
If your neighbor has a fire, lend them your garden hose. That's what he said. Called it Lend-Lease.
And so our country is going to be what our people have proclaimed it must be, the arsenal of democracy.
We produced more than all the countries of the world combined. Roosevelt made that happen.
No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
When Roosevelt led the United States during World War II, he was the head of the greatest coalition of nations in the most extensive war the world has ever seen.
The United Nations constitute an association of independent peoples of equal dignity and importance. The United Nations are dedicated to a common cause.
All through the war, he kept repeating it. The United Nations and the 4 freedoms.
Freedom of speech and expression. Freedom of every person to worship God in his own way. Freedom from want. Freedom from fear. They are the ultimate stake.
The war really pushed FDR in every capacity he had to be a leader. He worked 12, 15 hours a day. He was also declining in health. And in a sense, and I don't think it's overstating it, the war killed him.
I heard it on the radio and it hit me.
I was coming home and the paper boys were yelling.
I couldn't even eat my breakfast.
Paul came over everything.
I was walking alone down a dirt path alongside the Naval Airfield on Maui. A fella came running by and he shouted to me as he passed, without breaking his pace, that Roosevelt had died. I never felt so alone in all my life. It was like losing your own father.
He was a classy guy.
My mother came into the house, and she was different. And she said, Sonny, she said, President Roosevelt died.
I think that it is the destiny of this American generation to point the road to the future for all the world to see. It is our prayer that all lovers of freedom may join us, the anguished common people of this earth, for whom we seek to light the path. I see an America where factory workers are not discarded after they reach their prime, where there is no endless chain of poverty from generation to generation. I see an America whose rivers and valleys and lakes, hills and streams and plains, the mountains over our land and nature's wealth deep under the earth are protected as the rightful heritage of all the people. I see an America unified by tolerance, confident in strength, because their body and their spirit are secure and unafraid.
They brought him home to Hyde Park, the place he loved most, to bury him where he was born.
And the newspapers said, men will thank God on their knees 100 years from now that Franklin D. Roosevelt was in the White House. And the man driving the taxi asked Mrs. Roosevelt, "Who now will talk with me about my government?" And all across the world, people wondered, who will be their protector? Who will have the force to keep them free? Who will keep alive this dream of democracy? Who will replace this man who gave the world the gift of hope?
We've only a few minutes to talk together today, but my guests have promised to stay and do another open mind as well. Dr. Cynthia Koch, director of the Franklin D. Roosevelt Presidential Library and Museum, and Ambassador William J. Vanden Heuvel, lawyer, historian, and longtime president of the Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt Institute, now co-chair of its board of directors. You know, I'd like to begin in these few minutes remaining by asking you, Dr. Koch, first, briefly, why do people continue to come? What do they say, at any rate, about what draws them to Hyde Park in such continuing numbers?
I think that, as people have just seen in the film, there's an essential optimism that the Roosevelts portrayed in their lives and in their actions. And I think that that continues to draw people because there's a great spirit of hope about the future of America. The speech that was running as we viewed the funeral for the president saw the America through Franklin Delano Roosevelt's eyes, an America that I think we all dream about and that we all share. And I think that that is still very much part of the Roosevelt legacy and part of the reason that people come not only to pay homage to his home, to visit the gravesite, but to come to the Presidential Library and Museum to learn about that legacy. We have hundreds of thousands of people who have visited our museum, as well as 700 people a year who come to the research room, and another 1 million people who visit us electronically through our website. All of those people, I think, are doing what FDR wanted them to do, which is take lessons from his period in history and apply those lessons to the future.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, is it hope that connects you to the Roosevelt legacy?
It is hope. It is the fact that, in my judgment, Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt represent the best of America. In the 20th century, I think they transformed the country and made us the greatest nation in the world. The President confronted the two greatest crises of our history, the Great Depression and the Second World War. He led us into that new responsibility of world leadership. He understood the world that was to come. He had vision, and he had courage. And despite his disability, and people aren't often aware that he, because of polio, he was never able to walk again after he was 39 years old. He couldn't stand alone, and yet not 9 years after suffering that disability, he was elected President of the United States and lifted a nation that was on its knees because of the Great Depression to its greatest heights. Your listeners should go to Hyde Park, especially now, because in the library at the Special Exhibits Gallery, there's a photographic exhibit called This Nation Shall Endure. And it's the photographs of the Great Depression by the great photographers who worked for the WPA or for the federal government at that time as their employment. And when you see America in the time of its greatest economic crises, and then you see Franklin Roosevelt's buoyant, charming, strong, confident voice, telling us we have nothing to fear but fear itself, you get a sense that this great nation shall endure as it has endured.
It's that hope again, Dr. Koch, that you talk about. Do you think, do the people who come, and this is something that puzzles me, do they feel as devoted to the Roosevelts then as those people we saw in the film obviously were? Is it something as personal?
I don't think it's as personal as it was certainly for the people who knew Roosevelt in his lifetime. But I think there's still very much a strong sense that this is one of our nation's greatest leaders. He is now, and Mrs. Roosevelt as well, they are now in that great pantheon. I think people come to visit the Roosevelts in the way they visit George Washington or Abraham Lincoln. They're looking for an essential touchstone with what it means to be an American.
I'm hoping that in that group that comes, and we've had 14 million people come to the library since the president's death when he gave the property to the people of the United States. I'm hoping that in that crowd there's a 10 or 11-year-old boy or girl who's going to look at Franklin Eleanor Roosevelt and have their lives touched and will dedicate themselves to the future of our nation in the spirit of what those two great citizens did, those two great Americans. That would make all the enterprise worthwhile to me.
You feel that way too, obviously.
I do. And I think it happens. I think it's something that...
There is that response.
I think it's there. In the month after September 11th, 2001, we happened to be doing what we do every year, which is we celebrate the Constitution. We put a copy of the Constitution out on September 17th, and people are invited to read it and to sign it. And we had more people come to Hyde Park, come to the Roosevelt Library to read the Constitution and want to put their signatures on it. It was a way of affirming, as Bill had said, the best that there is in this country.
Well, it's clear that we have a lot to talk about, and you've both promised to sit where you are, stay where you are, and we'll do another program. But thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Cynthia Koch and Ambassador Vanden Heuvel. And thanks, too, to you in the audience. I hope you join us again next time. And if you would like a transcript of today's program, please send $4 in check or money order to the Open Mind, P.O. Box 7977, FDR Station, New York, New York 10150. Meanwhile, as an old friend used to say, good night and good luck.